The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. When news of the draft written by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito that would overturn the historic Roe v. Wade decision was leaked by Politico, it turned supposition and prediction into cold reality. But with New York's governor and state legislature standing in opposition, what will the effect actually be on Bronxites who seek abortion? Is this the first of other decisions by a decidedly conservative Supreme Court that could challenge or overturn long-held cultural standards? And if, in fact, the court does overturn Roe v. Wade as expected, what will the effect be nationally? And at this point, for advocates who are up in arms, two will join us in a moment, what can actually be done about it? After all, by rule, maybe not in practice, the Supreme Court operates on its own. These difficult issues are on our table tonight. We've got two advocates with us to address these and other concerns. So please join me in welcoming the CEO and founder of #VoteProChoice, Heidi Sieck. Nice to have you with us, Ms. Sieck.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, not necessarily happy about this situation.
I'm sure you're not. And neither is our other guest, the New York Field and Advocacy Manager at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice New York, Elizabeth Estrada, who is in the Bronx right now and lives in the Bronx. So it's nice to have you with us for a lot of reasons, Ms. Estrada.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ms. Sieck, let's start with you. We were just talking before the show, and I pulled out a quote from you that said the extremist anti-choice movement has made a 30-year investment into a legal infrastructure and misinformation campaign that has successfully blocked access to abortion for millions of Americans. Are you surprised? You knew it was coming? Did you see this day? And now that it's here, what's next?
I really appreciate that question because I have to say that there wasn't a word in that draft document that surprised me. Having been a person that's been involved in the reproductive rights movement since the late 80s, I started in Planned Parenthood of Lincoln, Nebraska. I have seen the strategy. And what we're talking about here is basically in the 80s, and it was Ronald Reagan who came together with a couple of political strategists in the religious right, Jerry Falwell, Paul Weyrich, and this was entirely constructed as a way to make sure that evangelicals were voting for the GOP, for the Republicans. And they knew that they had to use the issue of abortion to keep folks on the side of the Republicans. The Republican Party up until the 80s really wasn't anti-choice. And so what we found that its investment in protest infrastructure, political infrastructure, down ballot leadership training, state legislative policy has been recruiting judges, making sure that they have a network of conservative judges who are going to be appointed to courts. That has been the ongoing strategy in order to continue to win elections and maintain power. Now, that is the culmination. That's where we're at, is the culmination of this investment. The problem is that the Progressive and Democratic Party and the ecosystem did not match that investment. So we are seeing that after not addressing what the overly funded anti-choice minority has been doing for the last 3 years, we now come to the situation where we have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court that does not reflect the values of this country. Because let's make the point, Nearly 75% of this country does not want Roe v. Wade overturned, and they do not believe that the government or politicians should be in the business of deciding our most personal reproductive freedom and health decisions. So we're in a pickle.
So what's next? And I'm going to show in a moment, I'm going to show a map and show the kind of the scope of what might happen here. But what's next for you? I mean, as I indicated at the beginning, Supreme Court does what the Supreme Court does. It's not like you can vote them out. And it's not, and we'll talk with Ms. Estrada about, rallies and protests and other things. But really, they're going to sign a document of some sort somewhere along the way, and that'll be it, right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be dealt with now. First of all, I want to make the point that this decision is a draft decision. It is not a final decision of the Supreme Court. Abortion is still legal in this country, although overwhelmingly limited. Because of this 30-year chipping away of our reproductive rights and justice and health, 58% of this country lives in a place that's hostile to reproductive freedom, and it's hard to get access. And we see that in Texas, that has a 6-week ban, and now Oklahoma has a 6-week ban too. So it's already hard for people to access reproductive health care services in this country, but it is still legal. So if the Supreme Court decides to go ahead and make this decision real, which could happen probably the end of June, it means that abortion regulation goes to the states, where we expect about 28 states likely to ban abortion, and it will become inaccessible, illegal for most people.
Can we do this? Let's put we have a map that'll, I think Forbes put out, I think a very handy map. So we're going to put that up basically, we'll just define our terms. The red would ban abortion. The yellow, likely to ban abortion, the purple, abortion rights protected by law, and the blue, not expected to ban abortion within a year. So if you look at that map, I mean, you're really looking at 14 states that right now would still, as New York is trying to do, codify abortion. But really, it won't be available in a large percentage of the map of the United States.
That's right. And those 14 states will become the places that folks have to travel from all across the country to get basic health care and exercise their reproductive freedom. Mm-hmm. This is a major crisis. And thankfully, New York has always been at the forefront of access. Since the mid-'60s, late or early '70s, they've always been a bastion of access, and people have traveled here for their reproductive health care services, and that's what it's going to look like now.
Even However, more so. Yeah, go ahead. And then I want to bring Ms. Estrada into the dialogue.
I do want to make the point, though, that the conservatives on the Supreme Court are not going to stop just at overturning Roe.
Let's talk about that in a moment. Ms. Estrada, how does this affect people in the Bronx? I mean, the situation, and we talked about it before the show, the situation, frankly, in many cases is not great anyway for women who want to make choices about their own bodies. But if, in fact, this does happen at the end of June or sometime in the summer, what happens in the Bronx? Nothing, because the state is, going to codify it, or are you concerned?
Well, certainly I'm concerned, and I think Heidi highlighted something that applies to the Bronx, given that we have a large population that is low income, that are wage workers, that perhaps have to take a day off to seek abortion care. We are lucky in the state of New York that Medicaid is able to cover abortions, but that doesn't necessarily equate to accessibility, especially when you think about the barrier to access that the crisis pregnancy centers or FAKE clinics have on our communities. Often, I think information is really hard to access. Where can I seek abortion care? Where can I get it? If I take the day off and I go and seek abortion care, am I going to be deterred by a fake clinic? Not to mention the stigma that already exists. Bronx is a very religious community, so we face abortion stigma in our own homes. I often talk about how abortion stigma is fought at our dinner tables, and when we can't seek for the courts to provide our access, one of those ways that we aim to, remove the barrier to stigma is simply by talking about it. We think that in New York, we live in a liberal bastion that may not be impacted negatively, but the truth is that specifically in the Bronx, if you can't even leave your house because you're so filled with shame about accessing a simple and easy reproductive healthcare procedure, then that begins to be your first barrier.
I want to talk about the notion of choice. Now, you have talked about abortions being available, but really, and certainly Ms. Sieck's organization is Vote Pro-Choice, and you referenced it slightly. When a young woman, or an older woman, of course, has a decision to make, learns that they're pregnant, is there enough counseling? Do they get counseling to say, well, wait a minute, maybe abortion is not the only choice for you? Is there enough health expertise to counsel girls and women about what their options are without saying, well, you get an abortion or you don't get it? There's more here at work, and it's a much more, obviously I'm not a woman, it's a much more complex issue for a woman to face.
I think that as a largely Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, we face many obstacles, and one of those being the access to information. So while counseling is available to us, many of us in the Bronx may not have access to internet. There's an assumption that everybody has equal access to information. That's not entirely true. So we have independent clinics, we have Planned Parenthood clinics that provide counseling and options for a person to make a well-informed decision. At the Latina Institute, we're not here to change someone's mind to say they should have an abortion, but certainly the majority of people, like Heidi was referring to, the majority of people support a pregnant person's right to access abortion care without any interference by a politician or without any fear of criminalization. So while there are options and counseling available to them, we must think about, where can you get it? Is it easy to get it? And if you have the support of your family and community to access that information. And that's not always the case. And I know that firsthand, and I know that from hearing voices in the community that seek us to find information around where they can seek abortion care.
I want to go back to Ms. Sieck and ask her specifically about this particular case and the draft information that we got from Justice Alito. What he wrote relies heavily on a 17th century English jurist who had two women executed for witchcraft, and wrote in his own decisions in defense of marital rape, believed capital punishment should extend to kids as young as 14. And then the Times reviewed Alito's contentions and found a number of inconsistencies, not to mention that he references a 13th century discussion of abortion in medieval times. And I'm going to put up some of those words. This, to me, when I read this, I was like, we're in 2022 right now. If a person has struck a pregnant woman or has given her poison whereby he has caused an abortion, if the fetus be already formed and animated, he commits homicide. Now, that is what some people believe, but that basis came from the 13th century. Ms. Sieck, I don't even know what to say about it. You were talking about this drive to get here. Is it simply a religious conviction, you think, that is behind this notion that, of course, life begins with contraception?
Partly. Now, I want to make the caveat, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a constitutional attorney. I'm just a longtime activist of reproductive freedom. And the fact here is indeed that this all started as a political strategy. And so this is the manipulation of constitutionalism or originalism in order to achieve a political strategy. There is certainly baked in religious oppression here. And the Constitution was written by a bunch of white men, slaveholders who wanted to keep women and people of color out of power. And the Constitution, if you are originalist about it, that is still what it is doing. There is baked in a lot of white supremacy and a certain aspect of religious oppression, and that is certainly a huge issue, a major, massive issue. But at the end of the day, this is about controlling people. It's preventing people from having power and access and a voice in our democracy. And I just want to say, you have to remember, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion before the age of 45, and 2/3 of those are mothers. What we are talking about here is, are women full human beings, and at what point does anybody believe that the government has a role to play to say that a woman is not a fully formed human being and doesn't have independence and agency about her body and her being? Mm-hmm. And baked into that is, in fact, the control and the constriction of the Constitution. And so,
I want to ask you.
Jews actually believe something totally different than those religious constraints. And so we are having a real conversation about what does this actually mean around religious freedom.
You brought it up a little earlier about the implications for other items. For example, Brown versus Board of Ed, which ensured desegregation in schools. Are we going to get decisions on gay marriage? The right to birth control, apparently in Louisiana, Idaho, and Tennessee, that is on the table right now. Miscarriage care, they could say there's no counseling available. What do you foresee, or would you rather not foresee and take a chance and put the idea in somebody's mind that some of these things are up for grabs?
These things really are up for grabs.
You think that they really are, that these will be part of the next dialogue as this goes through?
Yes, these things are up for grabs because I really appreciate that folks are now understanding the reality of the misogyny and control that is baked into the extreme conservative GOP. Now, and all of the gay marriage, same-sex marriage, birth control access, the right to privacy is truly up for grabs because they are willing to do a national abortion ban. Mm-hmm. And but the good news here is that these are extreme views that are not reflected in the population. Again, we are 75% doesn't want Roe v. Wade overturned, or the government involved in these decisions. And so the fact is that we have a majority that are on the side of protecting these rights. These are justices appointed by elected officials. And so what we say at Vote Pro-Choice, it's time to change the laws by changing the lawmakers. And I do really believe that we have a huge shot at preventing these freedoms from continuing to be.
So that goes to Vote Pro-Choice. I want to go to you, Ms. Estrada. You mentioned it to me on the phone, and you briefly referenced it here, the idea of fake clinics. I had not really heard that before. Tell me about, do they exist? What are they about? And I know that you have some personal experience. I don't want to pry. You can say whatever you'd like about your own situation. But tell me about fake clinics. Do we have them in the Bronx?
We do.
Wow.
We actually have about over 120 fake clinics
120
in New York. Yep.
Wow.
They outnumber legitimate healthcare centers. Thankfully, in New York, we don't have anything that is paid by the state or the government, but in many places like Texas and Oklahoma and southern states, even legislators are, sending funds to fake clinics. And the proliferation of fake clinics, because of the attacks and abortion bans, has only increased. And much like my colleague Heidi was saying, they are attempting to replace legitimate.
I want to understand this. Number one, how do you know they're fake? And number two, who is putting them out there, and why are they there? And what would be the purpose of having a fake clinic?
Fake clinics exist simply to coerce people out of accessing abortion care. They're religious nonprofit organizations that co-locate near real clinics to deter people from going and attending their appointments so that they can talk to you about religion, they can talk to you about faith, and coerce you and shame you out of accessing abortion care.
I want to. I'll ask you first, Ms. Estrada, and then we'll go back to Ms. Sieck, who has, made it a point. We're recording this on Thursday. On Saturday, there's a national protest scheduled, a national day of action. For you, Ms. Estrada, what do you hope to get out of that? In other words, prior to a vote, prior to a decision, you hope to influence it. Somehow, I don't believe, and I mentioned this at the top of the show, that the Supreme Court is going to care one way or another if people are marching the street, because, frankly, another side could have their own day of action, so to speak. So, Ms. Estrada, what do you think about that? And then we'll go back to Ms. Sieck to further that question.
Well, I think what was said before, that the majority of, Americans support the right to access abortion. This is a way to create solidarity, to bring out people so that they feel they're not alone. As an organizer, I know that many of the people that I know and love in the Bronx feel that they should be able to access abortion without any interference from politicians or any criminalization. And so this show of mass mobilization is for the people watching at home to say, we support our access, our fundamental human right to accessing abortion. And we hope to show a huge showing so that others can come up and, make their voice heard. And so that SCOTUS can hear how unpopular this opinion is, and hopefully do right by the demands of their constituents.
Maybe have some influence. Ms. Sieck, New York, New Jersey, Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Maryland, Vermont, Massachusetts, Illinois, Nevada, California, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii are states who, are, at this moment, if the states are given the choice, they say they won't, limit abortions. They'll still allow it in their states. The governor of New York, I believe the number was like $131 million that she pledged for clinics to begin to expand their resources. Presumably you think this is a good thing. Do you get the sense that across the country, other states, I mean, we're rooted here in New York, so that's what we hear about. Do you think that other governors and other state legislatures are also going to do that? Because if people start traveling all over the country for these kinds of services, those states are going to get very popular, frankly.
Well, again, let me tell you, this decision was not a surprise. The reproductive rights, health, and justice movement have been preparing for this moment for many years, and that does include the states like Illinois and California and New York, who have been preparing to be able to have more access. One of the things that we do have to keep in mind that you were asking about the Bronx, more folks are going to be traveling to New York, so that will reduce access that even New Yorkers have because of the capacity issues. So why it's so important for the governor to be contributing funds to be able to expand access, because we're going to have so many more people traveling here. And again, this didn't surprise any of us. And like Illinois Planned Parenthood has been building clinics that are on the state lines to make it easier for folks that are traveling to be able to come to Illinois. We've known that this was coming. This is not a shock. 30 years of investment and political investment that those of us who've been on the ground have been watching. I am grateful. One of the things that's great about these marches is that I am grateful that we are now aware of the threat. We now know, even like you said, in 27 years of hosting this show, you've not had this conversation. I'm so grateful.
We haven't had to, that's right.
Now, because that is what I'm sure my colleague and I can agree, we've been talking about this for decades. We've been hoping that folks would believe us. And now we can see that the threat is real. The people are absolutely incensed. This is not the country that we want to live in. And we have work to do. We're behind, and we're gonna have to all just be marching to the polls and helping folks travel until we can get this fixed with state by state legislation, federal legislation, and getting rid of these justices and judges that are so extreme that they don't belong in these positions of power.
We're almost out of time. Ms. Sieck, we'll ask you the question, and we'll ask Ms. Estrada the same thing to wrap up. What are your worst fears about the consequences of this? It's nice to say women will travel, which may mean families have to travel. I mean, that's easy to say. But what are your worst fears that could happen here that obviously you would rather not see happen? All kinds of public health consequences, we presume?
Well, my worst fears have already happened in Texas and Oklahoma, and also the difficulty of access that's happened over the years. I mean, we have been chipping away at our access to reproductive health services for years. So low-income folks, women of color, transgender, non-binary folks have been struggling with access for years. People are being forced to stay pregnant against their will in Texas and Oklahoma, and so that is only going to get worse. Now, thankfully, we do have more access to medication abortion. There's the internet now. So we're not going to go back to what it was like before the 70s. We know that we will have more options of people helping each other, the ability to get access to services that people take care of their self-managed abortions in their homes. It's really unfortunate that is how it has to be, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. I
would say, you talked about chemical abortions and other options and people who counsel women. Those things, they're not shy about putting those in legislation, and it's possible that those will then ultimately be included. Ms. Estrada will give you the final word, especially about the Bronx. What are your fears about here in our hometown that might happen as this moves forward?
Well, I think without Roe, even more people across the country will be without critical access to abortion care. The autonomy to make decisions about our own bodies, lives, and futures is going to be completely taken away. And like my colleague Heidi said, we'll see an increase in people coming to New York. So although reproductive justice does not begin and end with Roe and access to abortions, Roe is critical to the well-being and full reproductive freedom of people of color. So we just hope that our show of solidarity and our mass mobilizations this weekend and beyond will influence SCOTUS and hear our demands to keep Roe.
Let's say thank you very much to Heidi Sieck, CEO and founder of #VoteProChoice, and Elizabeth Estrada, the New York Field and Advocacy Manager at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, New York. Thank you for your passion, thank you for your advocacy, and thank you for your information that's very helpful to, I think, all of us here in New York. So, folks, that will do it for our program. We thank you for joining us. We thank our great producers, Rebecca Hemick and Stephen Powell. Our director is Benaya War. And yes, we will see you with more next week. Good night.